maintenance schools or selective enrollment schools. Obviously, there's the whole charter movement. A variant of that is the online charter school world, and we might get into some of that today too. About 10% of students in the United States go to private schools, and they divide roughly 80% are religious private schools, and the others are non-religious. So that's a big choice option for families too. And a growing and sort of silent movement in homeschooling, so there's lots and lots of choice. Since last November, two different kinds of choice have entered the common parlance. One is vouchers, which sends shivers up the spines of many people. But you also might be thinking about education savings accounts, which is essentially giving families a debit card and allowing them to buy education services in whatever mix and match they think best suits their children. So on the horizon, we have lots and lots of different variants of school choice. And this brings us to a real important question. You heard earlier today, there's no debate that we need improved education outcomes for students in the United States, both for their own security and well-being and for the wealth and vitality and health of communities and nation as a whole. So if we're talking about improving schooling for kids, what role does choice play in that? And that is the topic that we're bringing to you. From there into a role internationally known as a capacity builder for people thinking about new models of education and new ways to reach students. He is internationally well-known as well as highly regarded in the United States. He leads a leadership program, a doctoral program at Cal State University, where he is now a higher ed researcher and essentially a talent developer at the higher ed level. His partner in our debate today is Jitu Brown, who many of you in Chicago may already know. He's a lifelong Chicagoan, so think of him as a little kid running the streets. He grew up to be a neighborhood activist, focusing on the Kenwood Oakland neighborhood. From there, he became a community organizer, and now he's taken that talent and that experience, and he has created now a national organization where he's focusing on grassroots advocacy and taking that model out into the world for other communities to emulate. So, may I ask you to welcome to the stage, please, Julian Vasquez Heilig and Jitu Brown. These two fine gentlemen are going to take the opposing side of the debate today. Let me now introduce you to the people who are going to be in support of the motion. First, I'm going to introduce Shane Evans, another name you may know here in Chicago. He started out as an educator, and from there, he moved to be the CEO of a very successful charter school operation here in Chicago, the University of Chicago Charter School with its 4 campuses. After a very successful career as their CEO, he's gone on to new adventures, which I think are interesting, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about. He is now leading an entrepreneur incubator known as the Academy Group, searches out extraordinary young people and helps them to get experience in owning and operating successful companies, and use that as a way to stimulate neighborhoods, stimulate individuals, and stimulate additional knowledge that will help these kids as they go forward. So that's Shane Evans. The last person to introduce you to is Mike Petrilli. Mike started out as a young idealist. You can see in a moment that that's changed. He started out being a very, very young activist with an organization called Young Education Professionals. From his idealistic perspective, he became a bureaucrat. Strange transition. He became part of the Office of Innovation and Improvement at the U.S. Department of Education. He was one of the very first leaders of that organization. And once he burned out as a bureaucrat, he went off to the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which is part of the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation, where he operates now as president and has been for the last decade considered a thought leader in new models and new approaches to education improvement in the United States. So would you please join me in welcoming Shane Evans and Mike Petrilli. minutes for this debate. So it's going to go as this. We had a coin toss in the back room, and the supporting side of the motion won the toss. So Shane is going to start. 2-minute arguments, 2 minutes alternating back and forth, then a 2-minute per side response, and then we get into the question round. I will ask each side a question, they get a minute to answer, and then they get to ask each other a question, and they get a minute to answer. And then they take the questions from the audience. Luckily, someplace there's a timer here, and I've already told these fine gentlemen I am going to be absolutely rigorous about time. So I'm prepared to get up and drill if I have to. All right. Turn the stage over, and you may begin.
Thank you for that, Margaret. My name is Shane Evans. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Academy Group. I'm so used to saying something else, and this is doing different. I grew up in the south side of Chicago. I have 19 half-brothers and sisters. I'm the first young person in my family to graduate from college. I'm a CPS product. We grew up on 75th and Exchange, right? And so my mother tried to enroll me at Adam Clayton Powell, which was on 75th and South Shore. The principal at that time told my mother not to send me there because it wasn't the type of school that he could guarantee that I would get the type of education that he thought I deserved. My mother's German and Russian. And so I always think to myself when I look back on that, would he have told everyone else that same thing? And so I think the 4 people on this stage, in fact the 5 of us, would probably all agree, and this is not contentious, that what we really want in schools is great outcomes from all young people, no matter where they live, their zip code, their color, their creed, their background. Now, school choice and charter school choice in Chicago is a contentious debate, a contentious topic. But I actually think it's not the root cause of the challenges that we face. We just heard earlier today, and it was interesting to me to be backstage, to listen to the fact that we said that in Naperville, students get $14,500 per pupil. In Chicago, they get $13,000, and no one gasped. No one was surprised. You didn't start Twittering that out. You didn't send an Instagram. You didn't send an email because you already knew that. And in fact, the actual challenge, the concerns that we have about providing people a free and great education, despite where they live, is about property tax, backing schools. It's about funding schools equitably and making sure that kids on the south side of Chicago get the same per pupil as the kids in Evanston. But while we might get sidetracked to actually have a debate about the types of people who want to run great schools, whether it's traditional public schools or charter public schools, we miss the real fight, which is actually the people who are funding this and know how to fund it equitably, but somehow choose not to.
Thank you. I believe you're starting off for the opposition. Let me rephrase, since I don't think I made it explicit. The motion is, choice is essential to improving public education in the United States.
So when I got my PhD, they said I couldn't talk in less than 20-minute blocks. So here we are. So we're really at a watershed moment for school choice. Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos want to evolve this idea of school choice. They proposed spending $20 billion on school choice. In fact, in the skinny budget, he proposed deep cuts to after-school programs, work study, college grants, so that he could pursue $1.4 billion in charters and vouchers right away. So really the question we have to be asking ourselves is, what does the future look like for charters and vouchers? Because it's becoming more clear by the day that Betsy and Donald are supporting a political agenda of privately managed school choice for communities from Chicago to California. And DeVos's approach is an evolution of the Michigan approach. I was born in Michigan, about 3 hours from here in Lansing. More than 80% of the charters there are for-profit. She also spent millions of dollars attempting to change the constitution of my home state. But notably, some civil rights organizations have pushed back against this reconceptualization, this evolution of school choice to something that maybe it wasn't meant to be in the beginning. But recently, statements by the NAACP, the Journey for Justice, the Black Lives Matter movement have said that vouchers and charters are far from appropriate remedies. In fact, the reason for that is the lack of transparency and accountability for the very students that it purports to help. So school choice should be only a one-way street. What do I mean by that? You can choose Stanford. But Stanford also has to choose you. I thought I had 7 seconds.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Turn it back and get
That
to
was
the
painful. This is my closing crescendo. So the bottom line is this: choice needs to be a one-way street. Families should be the choosing. With vouchers and charters, we can't allow those schools to choose those kids. Choice must be a one-way street for democratically controlled neighborhood schools that are well-resourced. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Macke. It's great to be here. I'm going to do that weird thing where you walk around the stage, if you remember that from the campaign last year. We're making that fun. I can tell Julian wrote his remarks a few days ago because he was referring to President Trump instead of President Pence, but that's another story. No, just kidding. Oh! So the question is choice essential? And the answer I would give is it is essential for those families that are taking advantage of it. Now, we know that here in Chicago and in big cities around the country, kids are growing up with the enormous challenges of poverty. And what that means for our young people is that by the time they get to school, they have already experienced an enormous amount of trauma and challenges. They tend to come in way behind in terms of the number of words they've heard and where they are with basic academic skills and other skills. And what those young people need, if they're going to have any shot at making it out of poverty and into the middle class, is they need phenomenal schools. Not just okay schools, not just not failing schools, they need phenomenal schools. This is the hardest work happening in America today that you all are so focused on and supporting. And the good news is that there are finally some phenomenal schools out there that are figuring out how to get this job done. Many of them are charter schools, many of them are Catholic schools, but many of them are traditional public schools as well. But any of you that have been watching the Chicago public schools over the years, or any other big systems, with maybe a handful of exceptions, know that our big, huge school systems that were designed 100 years ago are really struggling to figure out how to become something they weren't designed to be, which was systems where they could provide an excellent education for every child. And here we have some other schools outside of those traditional systems that aren't figuring it out. And so I would say to you, why would you say to a family, to a single mom who wants that choice for her child, so that brilliant child has a chance to make it out of poverty, that they are not allowed to do so? That doesn't make any sense to me. Look forward to talking more about that. Thank you.
I'm gonna mimic Mike instead. I got bad knees, so y'all give me a second. But first I want to say thank you for having me here today. I was surprised when you here, but that's okay. I do want to say that, of course, parents would want choice. Of course, as a father, I would like to be able to choose the school that my son goes to. But when we look at the school choice movement and we hear schools labeled as failing, in our communities, what we say is that we don't have failing schools, we've been failed. As a parent, if you live on Diversity in Ashland and your child goes to Agassiz, you don't have to worry if your child is going to have a world language. You don't have to worry if your child is going to have a library. You don't have to worry if there's going to be a teacher aide in every class. In schools like Agassiz, which is a neighborhood school, not too far from DePaul University, children have access to those types of what we call opportunities for inspiration. And if you ask any educator worth their salt, what is education? They won't tell you test scores. They will tell you the moment of self-discovery, the moment that child realizes that they can, that moment that child is inspired to do better. But while you have an Agassiz, you have a Madison on 44th and King Drive, where after Overton Elementary School was closed in 2013, they dumped 200 children into that school. Now, Madison had 6 straight years of improved test scores, 2 nationally board certified teachers. But at Madison, as a result of that type of policy, they had 52 kindergartners in one class. The school was so crowded that the children that received special ed services had to get their services under the stairs on the first floor. The point is that we don't have choice. When parents' schools are sabotaged, it's not them making a conscious choice. It's as if someone throws a grenade in your school and you grab your baby, you take your baby wherever you can go. Those are the neighborhoods I come from. Those are our members. Those are the thousands of people that we've talked to in focus groups. So we say that we want equity, not the illusion of school choice.
Mr. Brown, thank you very much. Passionate, very much passionate. All right, so the next step here is that each side gets 2 minutes to respond to what they've heard. I would just like to say one more time, the motion here is choice is essential to innovation in public education. Okay, so I think the focus here should be someplace in that neighborhood. So let me offer those in support of your 2 minutes to respond to what you heard.
It's really interesting to me when we start talking about school choice and charter school choice and private school choice, when we're talking about families of color, that schools choose them. It almost sounds as if we're doubting the great intellect of black and brown folks in the first place. Again, I'm from the South Side. I've taught in schools on the South and the West Side for now 24 years. And the parents that I know make informed choices. And the students I know that apply to go to high school make informed choices. I believe in the brilliance of black and brown people. And so it sometimes seems a little dangerous when we make accusations that institutions, whether it be Stanford or the University of Chicago, open up charter schools or any schools, that they would be able to so easily hoodwink the people who've been denied choice and access and equity for so long. And that's what I mean, that I worry sometimes about the kind of false narrative that there is actually a divide between making sure that students and families from tough neighborhoods get access to great schools, that the problem of that is that we brought in charter schools or vouchers, when these neighborhoods and schools have been underfunded before charter schools ever existed. And that this funding problem that you just mentioned, which has little to do with charters and more to do with what the people that were just out here saying that Chicago isn't funded appropriately, we would hold them accountable with that same passion and purpose.
You know, one more point is to say we would all agree that what we want is to have excellent schools across the board, charter, traditional public schools, Catholic, private, whatever. Problem is, we have struggled for decades to figure out how to fix these big urban school systems like Chicago's. Many, many smart people have been trying and have not yet succeeded. So by all means, let's keep at it. But while we do that, let's provide options today for children that need them.
So first, I think you misunderstood the point. One thing we do have in common is I served on the board of the University of Texas Charter School. In no way did I malign African-American families and Latino families. The point is that in the research literature, for example, Kevin Wellner's work, some of my own work, charters, and the ACLU actually found that 1/5 of all charters in California have discriminatory policies. And so what that allows them to do is allows the schools to do the choosing instead of the families. I'm a big believer in families having options. I just want to clarify that particular point. And then I'll yield to her.
Absolutely. And, you know, I believe in the brilliance of black families and brown families as well. I mean, that's my life. I believe in thousands of parents. And see, what the charter movement attempt, or the privatization movement attempts to do, is to separate school closings from charter expansion, right? And I remember the president of the Illinois Network of Charter Schools testifying about closing Dyett High School, a school where I sat on the local school council for 10 years. And I remember hearings where ministers paid by the city of Chicago brought paid protesters. They went and they paid the most indigent of men and women in our communities, the most desperate, and gave them $25 to come and say, close this school, despite the hundreds of parents who chose to say, we want our schools improved, not closed. Just like there was a poll in 2016 that said 5 out of 6 Americans said we want our schools improved and not closed. I've never seen a charter proponent stand with those parents and say, don't close their school. Why? Because many of these institutions benefited from the closing of those schools. What I am raising is that when we raise the question of equity, I I challenge whether we've really been trying to make schools equitable, right? I just gave you an example of 2 different schools, and I'll stop. I know my time is up, but we can continue that.
He obviously wants.
I don't want any trouble.
I just not messing around.
All right, well, so I think you've heard some pretty passionate positions. I now have the opportunity to ask each side one question, and they do get 1 minute to respond. I know, it's crushing. I know, it's still crushing work. I have to do it though. So I'm going to start with the folks who opposed the motion. And I would like to ask you the following question. Assuming that one would be willing to, would you be open to a high-performing charter school joining the district and opening a school inside?
So you're talking about co-location?
No, I'm not.
No.
No, I'm talking about a charter school saying, I am willing to be a district school, I am bringing my school, I'm bringing my model, my expectation, and I'm going to be part of the district, I'm going to operate a school. Would you say yes to that?
Well, so you said part of the district operated schools. Those are 2 can be different things. So, for example, in Austin, Texas, Travis Heights Elementary is an in-district charter. So I think most folks on this stage believe in parental choice. It's the role of governance that I think a lot of us have some disagreements about. So the Travis Heights Elementary in Austin, Texas is a district charter school. It was chartered by community members, the faith community, etc., but it's still part of the district, right? So one of the challenges is that what is a democratically controlled school? A democratically controlled school is a school that when something goes sideways for a parent, that they have recourse. Not, well, you can vote with your feet, which is what you hear a lot of times from parents. If something goes wrong with special ed, or something goes wrong for an immigrant care, well, you're supposed to vote with your feet. But in a traditional public system, there's a process that you can go through with democratically elected people at the end of that process for there to be transparency and accountability. So if it's a school that allows democratic discourse and democratic accountability for the community in that school, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
You got 5 seconds. I'm really not picking on you. I'm sorry. All right, your question. All right, your questions. Here's actually a harder question, so hold on. I gotta flip this thing. So, question for you is, given the fact that we have a small proportion of charter schools in the United States that are getting exceptional results, you live in one, there are a few around, there are a few in other communities, why is there not more expectation on the choice community to take what works and push it, to open their doors, to share what they know, to bring in and do leadership fellowships, whatever. My question to you is, why is that not happening? Where is the public service in public choice?
Well, let me push back on that. I think it is happening. There's been some great stories in the national press lately of efforts in a number of cities to get the charter schools and traditional public school systems to work together and share some of those ideas that are working and that are effective. I would also say one area where the research is quite clear is that when you have competition from charter schools or other kind of school choice, and particularly when that competition is high quality, like in Boston where the charter schools are fantastic, the competition lifts all boats. You see some clear impacts where the traditional public schools get better. So this narrative that somehow starting charter schools is hurting the traditional public schools, the opposite is true. It is actually creating in a political environment where at least in many places around the country, those systems respond and get better.
Is there time, Steph? Is there time?
Yes, there's time.
So, super quickly, to me, one of the obstacles of that is that we don't like to have honest conversations about this. We're talking about school choice for instance, on the back end, right? But those that are often against charters don't talk about choice on the front end, because if they did, they'd have to look at selective enrollment schools in Chicago. So we want democracy, then it's why is it harder to get into the top 10 high schools in the city of Chicago than it is to get into Harvard? And we've had magnet schools in Chicago, which takes the best, supposedly, the highest testing students, right, from all over neighborhoods in Chicago, and some of the specific places, we've had those for 30 to 40 years. And so if we were pro-choice and pro-democracy, we'd be just as fired up about charter schools and their, unequitable practices in the back end as we would on certain high schools and their selectivity process on the front end. And I say that as a Whitney Young alum.
Thank you. We're going to open it up now to questions, and I think I'm going to skip that first question. Can you drop that out? Okay. Question for you: what kind of schools do your children attend?
Traditional public schools.
Public school, Chicago.
My kids have attended public and Christian.
Okay.
My son goes to Murray Language Catholic Public School.
Very good. Thank you all. Okay, this is a question actually for the choice folks. Why can't we create a system that eliminates the need for choice?
I don't think that actually goes to the choice folks. I think that goes to the question that we had earlier, in the fact that there are 500 schools in Chicago, and that ideally all of them are supposed to be excellent. But we're in a business community, and we know that you get a return on investment. And so with unequitable funding, we can't get 500 excellent schools. And so it's not for the anti-choice or pro-choice, it's we can get 500 great schools where it wouldn't matter where you live if the 500 schools were funded equitably.
I was going to push back on that a little bit. I mean, I agree that the funding need is there, but we have a city right now where in certain neighborhoods, people have great neighborhood schools. Great neighborhood schools.
That's right.
And in many of the communities where we don't, since 1995, since Chicago Public Schools instituted school probation, right? That meant that the district decided everything, what your curriculum was, right? Who your external partner needed to be, who your reading specialist was, who your math specialist was. But for many schools, school probation was a graveyard. Those schools had plenty of money, but they had no voice in how that money would be spent. And for black and brown families, I mean, just yesterday, another police killing, can I pick this out? Another police killing of a man in Oklahoma, he was found innocent. We're not fighting the issue of revenue. There's a belief system that we're at war against. A belief system that does not value particular people based on who God made them. And that is why, when I talk to you about Diet High School, I just want to share with you that Diet High School is open because 12 parents had to starve themselves for 34 days. And on the 25th day of our hunger strike, the mayor of this city went to Lincoln Elementary and gave them a $21 million annex. The truth is simple. If it's complicated, it's a lie. So it's not so yes, there's a funding issue, but there's also a priority issue. And we say we want equity, and that equity is a prerequisite to choice.
And so there are charter schools here that have high expectations for the students you're talking about, and are getting amazing, helping those students have an amazing opportunity in life. And yet we say,
No.
oh, come on, Macke, come on. This is more fun this way. All right, good.
He flew all the way here for this.
I'm so true. I've been the furthest.
All right, I was going.
Let's go to another question. All right. Does scale create better opportunities for students?
Does scale present better opportunity? What is it? What do you mean by that? Like
So,
economies of scale?
Yes,
or
economies of scale.
Scaling up, or what kind of scale are we talking about?
Economies of scale.
Well, there's another question on here that our charter schools are getting. But I think
It's mutiny now.
But I think that that's relevant to this particular question, which is that there's a lot of research coming out now that we're getting to this tipping point. We're getting to this tipping point where charters are no longer a boutique thing. There was a study in LA that shows that charter schools are now drawing down $500 million from the LA school district. We have a new article coming out in the journal, the Transformative Leadership and Policy Studies, that we haven't engaged with what is the financial drawdown of charter schools. And so the economies of scale are impacted in traditional districts because they still have to provide buses, they still have to provide food services, etc. But now you have this drain. But I want to say one quick thing, that the research doesn't show that competition improves success. And to show this, we have fact checkers watching this debate. So just fact check Petrelli, hashtag on Twitter, and and those fact checkers will address that for us.
It's P-E-T-R-I-L-L. But look, I mean, we'll have to do this offline, but I think that is one of the most solid findings. In all these studies, even the negative voucher studies that have come out lately, made the news a lot, have found that while the participant effects are sometimes now negative, they're still finding positive effects from competition, which is important and encouraging.
In the late 1980s, fact check, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the graduation rate in Chicago for African American male students was between 30 and 40%. In 2006, 1 out of every 40 African American males that started at high school in Chicago at 14 would graduate from college by the time they were 25. If that included students with an IEP, that number drops to 1 in 50. And so these numbers didn't start in 1995, they didn't start in 2006, because I was talking about 14-year-olds by the time they were 25, and we're talking about the 25-year-olds. In 2006, that means 1981, which means in 1981 there were no charters around, and those students would have been starting school in 1988, which means they were getting a substandard quality education starting in 1988. And what's hurting public schools in America, not just Chicago, is not charter schools. I'm gonna double down with Jitu and say, 1, people don't believe that black and brown kids are brilliant. 2, if they did believe it, they don't fund it the right way. Because all of you fine people that don't live here, I bet you send your kids to schools that are funded real equitably. In fact, over equitably. And so we could be on the stage and talk about that money doesn't matter, but I bet your sons and daughters get the best education that you can possibly pay for if you live in a district where they pay real well for it.
And I just want to say this, you know, you often get painted as an anti-charter ideologue, right? And that's not where I'm coming from. In the Journey for Justice Alliance, we have members who send their children to charter schools. What we are saying is that, you know, the great organizer Ella Baker, people talk about the civil rights movement all the time, but they never talk about Ella Baker, who was the organization builder in the civil rights movement. And her belief was that strong people don't need no leaders. That was one of her quotes. And she believed in grassroots leadership and grassroots democracy. And the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, where I come from, is an organization born out of that tradition. And what she often talked about was, or what I would raise with the privatization movement, is that in cities where privatization flourishes, one, it's very race-centric. So for the most part, white families don't send, when they improve their schools, they don't send their children to charters. They get magnet schools, they get selective enrollment schools, for the most part. But also, in many of these cities where privatization is taking root, we don't have the right to vote. The lack of an elected school board in Chicago is a voting rights issue. If I pay taxes, I have the right to hold the person accountable who's creating policy. Right? There's only one city in the United States.
Okay, let's wrap. You're brilliant as an orator, but not concise. Let me ask one question. No, you can work to your task, I like it.
Yes, ma'am.
So here's my question to you. If I hear you correctly, you would like more decentralized power and control over school to be more in the community. Why is that different than allowing a private organization that has essentially people of the community serving on boards closer to the community of the students that they serve? Help me understand why we are not talking about the same thing here.
Well, that sounds good. However, there's a new study that's coming out that shows that in black communities, only 25% of charters actually have parents on them. In white communities, 75% of charter boards have parents on them. So it's, that, I mean, you know, prima facie, I think that's how you say that? That sounds good, right? But, I think that we have to think about reforms that are community-based and are democratic controlled. The education reform movement over the past decade and a half, has been really focused on a lot of top-down policy, whether it be Common Core, testing, and all those other things. So I think the new place that we're going, the new innovative place that we're thinking about, California, for example, we have what's called local accountability. You're probably aware of the LCAPs and the LCFFs. Is how do we think about doing reform in a way that's community-based and gives families and communities more voice instead of less voice, as Jitu spoke to.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that as a researcher, and you look about a sample size, I've heard many of the arguments that you've made be based on a region or a portion, and you said that white people don't go to charter schools, but in Arizona, in fact, they do, and they district the district of charter schools there so that middle and upper income white families can take advantage of them. So just as a point, as a counterpoint. And again, I heard you say voice and control, but 60,000 students in the state of Illinois go to a charter school. 90% of them are black and brown, 87% of them are on free or reduced lunch. And I worry that we're saying that they're not somehow establishing voice by doing research, saying that right now they think, right, whether they're right or wrong, that the best school for them is Learn. Or that we talked about having communities in control, color in control, well, that's the CEO of Learn Charter School. I guess he's a punk. And Tim King, who runs a school for 4,500 black men in the city of Chicago, I guess he's a punk, because he's not. And so I think when we simplify these issues to a certain degree, we do great disrespect to folks who are working on the same page to get the same outcome. And we wouldn't want to think that all professors from the Ivy League are against equity and justice.
I would just say that I worked with Tim King. No, I have a lot of respect for Tim King. I worked with Tim King when he was the principal at Hillsborough Institute, right? And one of the things that I raised, and so when we say things like this, yes, I'm proud of the 100% of the young African Americans who go to college, but I'm not proud of the 59% of the freshmen who don't make it to their senior year. I'm not proud of that. And so if we're going to have honest discourse, we also, when we talk about Noble Street, and people lift up Noble Street as if Noble Street, as Mayor Rahm Emanuel said, was the secret sauce. But I helped form a group called Voices of Youth in Chicago Education. And the students exposed the fact that they were finding black and brown students at the rate of $200,000 a year. And then they stopped the practice. And that they were actually counseling out large numbers of students. We did a report in 2014 called Death by 1,000 Cuts.